All right. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, welcome to the Safety and Resilience Committee meeting. I'll just open the meeting with karakia. Tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki waho, tuia ki roto, tuia ki te here tangata. Ka ronga te pō, ka ronga te ao, homie, huie. Unite above and below, unite within and without. Unite as one, listen to the night, listen to the world of light. Now we come together as one. Well, welcome. Sorry, we're a little bit late starting. So hi to those in the room, those online, and those dozens who are on the live stream. Look, as this is our Safety and Resilience Committee meeting, it seems, I think, appropriate to acknowledge again the terrible North Island floods and the loss of life that's occurred there, and all the upsetting of people's lives and livelihoods. We heard yesterday that there are a number of ORC staff assisting in the North Island, and that's valuable work, and they'll bring back useful experience from that too. It's certain there'll be a lot of information coming to us in the future about the context and experience of those Northern Island floods, but that's not what our papers today are about. So we will move on to that business now. Apologies, we've received an apology from Councillor Brian Scott. Are there any other apologies?
I'll have to leave at 12.
And right, Councillor leaving early, and McCall, who knows, we may be done. Right. Someone like to move to accept those policies? Elliot, someone second that? Thank you, Alexa. All those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. No request to speak to the public forum. We haven't received any other matters on the agenda. Are there any other requests? No, thank you. Declaration of interests are published on the ORC website. So look, our first paper is on river management. So if we could invite, who are we inviting to come and talk about this? Michelle and Jean-Luc, have a look at it. So the purpose of this paper is to provide an update on the progress of the July-August 2022 floods and earlier floods. I guess, Michelle and Jean-Luc, perhaps if you just summarise anything that's absolutely essential in here, any outstanding points, and then we can open the meeting up to questions. So over to you to start with.
Thank you, Councillor Somerville. I'd just like to introduce Pam Wilson, who is our team leader for infrastructure and river management, who is online today. Thank you for the introduction and acknowledging the North Island flooding. It is devastating, and we are supporting very much at an administrative level, mostly at this time. The purpose of this paper was developed last year to provide a quarterly update around river management activities and progress. There was a design change coming into this committee to really focus on the current flooding events that ORC have experienced in 2020 and 21-22. July 22. So it's taken more of a front end around just an update on those flood events, and we've got some information at the back that relates to the quarterly reporting. I will take the paper as largely read and take questions from the floor.
Right, we've got Councillor Wilson.
In the context, and I should have almost made a comment earlier on the agenda, that yesterday we had Pierre talking about climate change to us at public. It's nothing relevant necessarily to you about climate change and our need for action. And your comment under paragraph 49 here on climate change, flood recovery has focused on reinstating like for like damaged infrastructure. And the past weeks, or the past 10 days, or past few months of weather events I just wanted to lift us up in governance and understand when we will have an opportunity for considering whether it should be like for like, or like reinstart or rethinking how we do things. And there's two parts to that. Obviously, is people's expectations that if you've got a flood bank, you're flood proofed, which isn't necessarily the case as we've found out. But also us understanding the investment going in and whether we have to reconsider doing like for like. And when is that time or opportunity that we should be doing that? Or should we have done that already in hindsight? Yeah.
I can lead that discussion, and Pam, it'd be great if you feel comfortable to comment on that as well. Thank you for that question. It's a good question, and it's something that we do grapple with as infrastructure owners. The reason we replace like for like initially is to obviously reinstate the current level of service and to get resilience in the functionality of whether it's the river or a piece of infrastructure. The time for actually looking at whether we need to increase that level of service or design or the structural integrity of that is through our condition assessments and our review processes. So we currently have one going on for the Taieri scheme review, and we will be embarking on one for the Clutha. It's in the scoping phases now next year. So that's really when we start projecting into that 5, 10, 20, 30 year of look, how do we upgrade this? So our minds do turn to the resilience of it. And we have signaled that in our infrastructure strategy that some of these areas do need to be upgraded.
And the next part of that question is, when do we actually look at other areas that, given climate change and our need to adapt, should we be looking in other places? And that's the problem. It's, yeah. Should we be looking forward at that? And is it a governance piece that we actually have to put some more energy into?
I think we've got the elements of that happening now, particularly at Clutha, and John, you can comment on that. Pam, I would like to comment on this, sorry. You know, we've had the coastal report done for Clutha. We are actually moving in that space. And this particular the infrastructure strategy indicates that we are going to be looking at what adaptation looks like. Does it involve managed retreat? Does it involve, you know, acquisition? Does it involve, you know, a range of methods? So it is very much in play now, and we are doing quite a lot of work at the Clutha mouth. Pam, would you like to add to that comment, please?
Yeah, I could probably go into quite a bit of detail on this. So there's a lot underway, and as Michelle's already alluded to, in relation to the schemes in particular, we're constantly reviewing performance against levels of service and future thinking about how we might manage the schemes. And outside of the schemes as well, there's always work underway to analyse the performance of the rivers, the behaviour of infrastructure within those rivers as well, and long-term thinking around that. So there are other places sort of on the agenda and future thinking around adaptation or strategies around how to potentially manage them into the future. So it's a broad topic. It's huge.
Can I, to you, Mr. Chair, can I add also, so you're very aware of some of the adaptation work we're doing outside of the flood protection scheme area, so head of the lake, Genoki, Southern Indian. So we've got already work having our own adaptation, better understanding how the physical environment is going to be in the future, and part of the changes are due to climate change. But to consolidate that, we have a piece of work that is happening, which is a natural hazard risk assessment for the region. And the idea here is to look to the region as a whole and identify areas where the risk is high enough to justify further work, which is could be adaptation. So it's really to have that comprehensive approach at the region scale to see that do we need to do more work similar to what we're doing in Southern India and head of the lake in region in areas that we're not yet doing work.
And the reason for asking that is this is a public meeting, and I think that we all probably have some comfort with that work. I'm not sure that it goes out and is understood clearly at the public level, but also I think there will be a demand or an interest in this more of how we do that and that review process and ensuring that we're reviewing it. And look, I've got great comfort that we've got great staff doing that stuff, but it's also articulating how that looks for the community. We may have to do some more comms and articulation of that, but no, thank you.
Thanks, Kate, for raising that, and thanks for those answers. Councillor Malcolm.
Oh, yeah, just further to that, with that, identifying our natural hazards, and then I understand the scheme performance reviews are happening at the moment. Will they all be set in time for us to begin our strategic conversations for the 24-34 long-term plan?
Yes.
Magic answer, that's all I need.
So I'll condition that.
Yeah.
No, yes, for the Tyree scheme review, we're actually moving really well through the pieces of work and information that informs us.
Yep.
So we've started reviewing the initial assessments that are coming back. What we're looking at towards the end of this year is then starting to analyze internally that information and start the communications with governance and first internally, and then start looking at the community information, sessions as well. So we're looking at what that communication strategy looks like, but we're on track to actually get that information.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think, the infrastructure strategy and the LTP already kind of flagged some areas which I put in there that might need some work. Yeah.
Thanks, Rochelle.
Sorry, may I just one more
Yes.
condition on that? That review really informs the work or investment that needs to be undertaken.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, understand. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Murphy.
So just in regards to that plan, are you working within constraints of funding? Because what I'm interested in is, what are the critical things that need to be done and done soon, rather than being constrained by what you think you're allowed to spend. Because we've seen this last 2 weeks, what can happen, and it's only going to be a matter of time where we're going to have a flood event in Otago.
Thank you, Councillor. Nice to meet you.
You too.
I'm sorry, I had to look at your name. Are you referring to the review or just the broader response?
Well, I guess it's a broader response.
Okay. I think it's an area over the last 3 years I've been at ORC that we've talked about. We need to actually have a look at the funding model around our response, and this paper is indicating that we do have response and recovery costs associated with these events. Currently, these are funded by the scheme deficit reserves. And there are some funding opportunities associated with that. We had some with the climate resilience program. The Lower Clutha has some funding options with it, but yes, we do have to have a discussion around the frequency of these events and these costs, particularly where we're under that threshold of about 2.5 million before we can actually have access to NEMA. What does that model look like for us? Because it's the frequency of these events, not necessarily the intensity that we've experienced over the last sort of 2.5 to 3 years. I don't have an answer on that today, but we are going to be doing some work there. Nick is aware of that as well, in terms of what does that model reserve look like?
I think I'll just add to that. It's important when we do discuss it as part of that long-term plan to think about all the constraints, because there's the funding of it, but then for every time we have an event and we respond, we have an issue with delaying the program because we have to divert resources, and then we also have some constraints within the construction industry to deliver on so many programs of work. So all of those threads need to be pulled together to think about, well, because obviously the better indication we can give the market as to what our plans are, then the more they can gear up with them and have confidence that work will be there for them. So it is a really important conversation for us to have and to give that direction to the team through that long-term plan.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. That was an important point. I missed the point about the constraints. We haven't felt constrained within ORC. ORC has been very supportive in terms of responding to the communities and making sure the infrastructure is brought back up to specification and resilience. Pam, I'd invite you if you would like to make a comment on that. It's a really important comment.
No, I don't really have a great deal to add, other than to probably say that the work around the scheme reviews in particular, that's business as usual. That's stuff that we're doing day in, day out on a routine cycle of condition assessment, performance assessment. For example, the Taieri and Clutha are on a 10-year cycle for their full condition assessments. They've been brought forward because if we have an event like we did in February 2020, we look at the scheduling of that and we do need to assess our flood banks potentially a little bit sooner. So we've brought them forward, but again, it's still part of the routine day-to-day stuff. But it's that the longer term, what do we actually need to do to keep up, or longer term adaptation? Those things take time, and it's not all about money necessarily. It's about bringing communities on that journey, which is it takes time. We all need to come up to speed with it.
Okay,
Thank you. Pam.
okay, Tim. Good. Right, thanks for those answers. Councillor Weir.
Well, I was just wondering if there's any in this work, if you've identified any homes or groups of homes or communities that have been significantly affected by the floods to the extent that they're no longer livable to the same extent, or those communities aren't necessarily protectable in a way that we can have confidence in the future against future floods.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Nice to meet you as well. I will start with this if you wanted to add to it. The events that are described in this paper, no, we haven't had any, people, property threat where we've felt that any, there was a risk there. But in saying that too, I think most of the flood events we've had over the last sort of 3 to 5 years, just in my radar, have mostly just been land affected, kind of erosion or some of the infrastructural assets. There is work that we are doing across the sector around vulnerable communities, and there is a report around that which the river sector nationally is looking at those areas that are identified as vulnerable. And some of those areas have been identified, on the Taieri, down at Clutha, and that was a report that was issued nationally last year. But that's definitely a part of looking at the scheme review in more of a strategic context as opposed to the BAU that Pam's talking about. And it's work that Natural Hazards do also.
Yeah, and just if I can add to that, is the event mentioned in the paper are not those exceptional events that always, kind of get to the level of service of the team. But we've done some work through the years with working with the district councils on identifying hazard areas for them to include into different planning tools, district plans, but also we're currently working with different councils in the region around spatial plans or future development strategies that will identify also constraints related to hazards, and that will guide the discussion around, is it an appropriate land use to have residential activity, for example, in an area that is low-lying, exposed to flooding or repeat flooding. That work is also happening.
Thank you. Elliot, again.
Sorry, I just wanted to follow up on that. In your discussions with those district councils and stuff, in your experience or opinion, have they been productive? Of the councils have been really receptive and incorporating those into their spatial and future development plans?
Yeah, if we take, for example, the Dunedin City example, we've been working very closely with the city during the review of the district plan. So they probably heard about the second generation plan, the 2GP. So most of the natural hazard information that we hold was provided to the city, and that included that into the plan through a natural hazard overlay layer. So that's a good example of productive collaboration with the city.
Are you confident in that collaboration with the district now?
Yeah, we're doing work for the moment with CODC around the Teviot Valley Spatial Plan and so yeah, generally speaking, yes.
Can I-
Is there any further questions? Oh, Michelle.
Could I just quickly add to that, and add to it as well? We do go through processes with the district councils where we look at their rezoning, and the ORC will present its position where if it's not in agreement, that's an appropriate change of land use. And we've been doing that in the Dunedin area, but our position is maintained usually if it's not appropriate to be put in.
Are there any further questions or discussion? Councillor McCall.
Oh, yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michelle, I just wondering if you could just fill us in a little bit more, clause 38 through 41(2), which is around the gravel extractions consents to the global consent that you're looking for managing waterways. And I see that the next steps coming up is basically to lot is the final lodge of the S92, whatever that may well be, and for likely 1st July start of 2023. I was wanting to know if you just give us a wee bit more about it, and are we on target for that to receive it on 1st July 2023? And then just a wee bit of choreo around part 40, that your gravel removal is for hazard mitigation only, and what defines hazard mitigation.
Excuse me, Lloyd, what page are you looking at there?
12.
It was the second last.
Right, page
12, yeah.
Page 12, paragraph 14 and whatnot. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor McCall. Good questions. Okay, so with the global consents, these are consents that the ORC engineering team hold to undertake activities across Otago in river management. They expired almost 2 years ago. We lodged our renewal process and still in that process. The previous consents never had the capacity to undertake gravel extraction. We included gravel extraction, which I'll touch on as your third point. Are we on track to achieve by the 1st of July with this the year 3 annual plan? I hope so. We're working with the Consent Authority in earnest, and they've been great. We're just in that final stages of some technical information. It's looking promising. That would be my operational hope. We are preparing ourselves for a July sort of start with our processes that go behind that in terms of how we're going to be incorporating that into our activities. But I can't commit to that if the Consent Authority, has some further, but I'm confident we're over the, we're 95% there.
So yeah, they've got all the information they need.
Yes, so we have ecologists working together,
Yeah.
and there's been an environmental management plan written, which is a great start to really how we then form our management plans off that. Your last point about hazard mitigation only, introducing gravel extraction into these consents is basically around flood and hazard mitigation. So what we'll be doing is looking at how we build that profile across Otago in our rivers to look at which areas need hazard mitigation. We'll either be leading that with the community on what they need to be doing with that. I guess it's a start. And with that, we have the land water renewal plan where we're working on a code of practice around gravel management, etc. So there's a couple of pieces coming together here, but
Has gravel management not been included in the consent in the past?
no. No, so, you know, we just want to get into that space to be proactive around key areas that may require some hazard flood management mitigation, which is very much in step with other regional councils. And then I think, you know, through next year 3 and into our next long-term plan, we may be looking at a future role of gravel management that might be very similar to some sort of licensing system, which he can have under their consents.
Thanks for that. As you know, gravel's fairly dear to my heart.
I know, and it has been very topical, and I have only, you know, I've come in to take this in a very sort of step by step to get into that space. It's not something we can pop up. It doesn't prevent people going through a consent process themselves, but I think this is the first enabling step to be able to be a bit proactive in the gravel management space.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michelle. We'll have Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Kelleher after that.
Thank you, Councillor McCall, for raising this issue, because I've forgotten I had that. And it's just a technical one. I probably should have emailed you, page 36, the graph at the top. And I appreciate that you put the red restriction in, but it hasn't got April there. And I'm just wondering whether April is going to be an available month, or whether it's the restriction goes to include, sorry, at the top is your global consent seasonal work window to work in waterways is the 1st of October to the 30th of April, but you haven't got April in the graph. Does that make sense? And I'm just wondering, is April out because of the longshore eels and collapses as well, or is that an opportunity? Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you for picking up on that technical error.
No, it's not an error.
April's dropped off.
And it actually is a really important thing
Yeah,
for
yeah.
to understand. And
Yeah. So our window to work in waterways is defined April to October to April. That's not really negotiable. And we plan our work programs around that. Pam, did you want to add to that? I'm picking your cue up. Did I do something with a lovely diagram?
I'll fix the diagram. Thank you.
but sorry, the question though is April in still, or is it out because of which is wrong?
No, April's correct.
April it's an okay one.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We've left. I did that.
It's easy to cut, Chris.
Thank you. Councillor Kelleher.
Thank you. Michelle, just 3 quick questions on, I suppose, first one is around, we've been underway with a pretty, heavy work program, a lot of investment expenditure, correcting, damage from I think it was the 2020 floods. If we got another major flood tomorrow, where would we be at and where those repairs are at? And would we still be in quite a vulnerable position, or are we now in a more resilient position?
Thank you. Good question. With regards to the 2020 flood recovery program, we're in a better position. The remaining 2 significant works, which are the relief wells and further downstream, are manageable in a flood event. So they have been they have taken some time to receive the appropriate consents, etc., that go with carrying that work out. But we're in a good position.
Okay, good, great. It's great to hear that. Second question was around, given what has just happened in North Island and the extent of damage to bridges, it's become quite topical in my area around gravel build-up, and we've just had some questions on that. It was a question on Radio Central the other day, just around assessment of the current bridges, and if you did get an extreme event, where our bridges are at, given that the national focus is going to be on repair to an extreme amount of damage in the North Island, and but if something like that was to happen here, it'd be quite catastrophic, given that there's been some quite public very lengthy effort to try and just repair one or two bridges in the Maniatoto. So will there be a heightened sort of emphasis on just where we sit, given that that extreme event could happen here and we could have a huge amount of devastation?
Thank you. Yes, very topical. And Pam actually has a very good response to this on one area, which I think you might be quite keen to hear about. And then I can sort of talk holistically on that. Are you comfortable to lead that, Pam?
Absolutely, I'll give it a try. Thanks, Michelle. So when it comes to a lot of the bridges, in theory, ORC don't own a lot of bridges. So it's up to the territorial authorities, Waka Kotahi, Kiwi Rail, in terms of their own bridges. However, and the one that Michelle is talking about on the Koru River, which Kakanui Valley Road, for example, where we do have some work to do in the channel to assist with the longer term stability of the abutments in that bridge. And we've been engaging or starting to engage with Waitaki District Council around that, where we can make sure that the work that we do in the river works in conjunction with work that they do to the abutment and vice versa. So we will work with others to help.
And I think it's really important to note that the gravel management is one element of the broader infrastructural plans around those bridges, and bridges have to be fit for purpose. And particularly with the Waitaki District Council, we are having a session with them in the next few weeks, I think, where, you know, they're going to be talking about what their long-term plan is with that bridge. And we work in with what we can do and assist, and it's very much a sharing co-funding situation. The gravel is part of the problem. But the infrastructure itself needs to have a plan. How that's looked at, Councillor Kelleher across Otago, it may be that the district councils and, you know, our connection into those respective areas, that we do get an understanding of what their plans are with their bridges, and have some sort of, you know, collaboration around, you know, where responsibilities lie. And how it can be supported in terms of, until they reach those responsibilities with their infrastructure changes or upgrades. So, you know, that's kind of where we're at with that.
I'll just add too, I think it's a very good point, Gary. I think given what's happened in the last 2 weeks, and even further back with Northland and Auckland earlier, there will be a significant focus on appropriate protection of infrastructure, particularly where it's critical for lifelines and delivery of, you know, basic services. While we don't own those assets, we clearly have a role where our management responsibilities could impact their ability to withstand events. So my expectation is what Michelle just currently outlined, that we would very much come to the table and make sure that our management regime was lined up with the asset protection plans that might be put in place. And I think that is a responsibility we have, and that's the way we should approach it.
Excellent. No, I totally agree with that. Thank you. The answer I was hoping to hear. My third quick question was just around forestry slash, and certainly with the North Island events, that forestry slash seems to be becoming more and more of an issue. Once you've had one, it seems to bring more and more as each event happens. Today, we haven't really had those sorts of issues, but do we have an understanding of, if we got a much more heightened event, whether forestry slash would be a big issue for us or not?
So I'll take that one. So this Joe Gilroy we did anticipate the question, because it obviously has been in the media further north, and it's topical, so we are aware of it. I think what I would say, Gary, it would be very difficult for us to understand in an event what the outcome might be. I think that's just something that would be quite hard to anticipate. I think what we do know is that the way it's been managed up north has left some serious questions, given what's happened. there is some rules in the National Environmental Standards for plantation forestry. Joe's written here, and I would agree with her that that piece of regulation is very permissive. And that's not just for slash. There are other challenges around sedimentation and things that have been highlighted with central government. So there are conditions around slash, and we can monitor those, and we do through the forestry program that is reported through the, what is it now, Regional Leadership Committee. And that's around needing to place it on stable ground, making sure it's not on the edge of landing sites so it doesn't collapse, and not depositing it into water bodies or land that would be could become submerged in an event. I don't think that the National Environmental Standards, as they're currently written, provide a great deal of confidence in that slash management space. And my expectation, given the recent events, is that central government, who have already initiated a review of that NES, will be having a much closer look at how forestry sites are managed. So that review we will obviously get a chance, as we normally do, to feed into that.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Now, look, I'm aware time is ticking by. Are there any other questions or discussion at this point? I don't see any. Well, look, we have the 3 recommendations of noting items that are on page 3 of that report, noting the summary, noting progress.
Happy to
made,
move.
Noting update. Who was that? Lloyd? No. Kevin moves, Andrew second, all those in the, or any discussion on that? No. No need to talk. All those in favour?
Aye.
It's done. Thank you very much. Michelle, Jean-Luc and Pam, thank you very much for the report and for your answers and discussion today. It's been very helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Summerwood.
Yep. And we're moving to 6.2, Civil Defence Emergency Management Quarterly Update. Jean-Luc staying there, and Glenn Mitchell is coming to join us. So again, we'll let Glenn sit down.
And apologies from Matt Alley, who was the author of the paper, who returned from deployment yesterday and then had a positive COVID test last night, which seems to be an unintended consequence of the response throughout the North Island.
Thank you. Well, look, this is a quarterly update report. I guess, Glenn, Jean-Luc, if you've got anything you would like to point out to us in particular, and then we will open up to questions from the council.
But yeah, just to say that this is our first opportunity, I guess, to give a good outline as to how CDM is operating in Otago. It is a shared service arrangement with the 6 councils operating in Otago. Otago Regional Council has 2 roles. One is as a member of the Otago CDM group and its requirements around hazard management, hazard identification, etc. And then the second is as the administering authority, and as part of that role is as the employer of the emergency management professionals in Otago, delivering on behalf of the 6 councils.
Thank you. Well, I guess we, I'm sure everyone here has read it in great detail. So any questions or discussion on that? Councillor Wilson.
I'm just intrigued with the table in paragraph 6 and the should haves, because those are the ones that we may learn from. And the can you elaborate what you may have learned? And I'm going to give you an example. I think it's January 2021 one, which was a tortuous time to be activated because it was right on New Year's, if I remember rightly. And what learnings came from that. And if I can also reflect that what happened because of the timing was a huge problem on the regional roads, which was quite a different problem. And I heard greatly from people down in the Tapanui area of Kelso how difficult it was to have with cars getting blocked there. So just how does this, it's not a criticism, it's about how do you take those learnings and deal with them?
So factors, I guess, that have had a bearing on whether the ECC activated or not were around up until late 2021. We didn't have a dedicated facility, and so the decision to activate was to an extent, I guess, compromised by not having a dedicated facility and how that would actually operate. But certainly following more recent events, the commitment has been made that if any district activates its emergency operations centre, we will activate the emergency coordination centre, the regional coordination centre, in support. And the key roles there are around the sharing of intelligence from the likes of engineering and the natural hazards team around how the event may be evolving, but also, and we've seen a significant amount of that in the last few weeks, around the potential surge support that a district emergency operations centre may need.
So, and the reason I've given that one as an example is, again, looking at how things have transpired in the last couple of weeks about the roading network, which has a cross-party, it's often TAs or it's Waka Katohi and state highways, and they don't necessarily talk well together. And just wondering, is that a role that you could see being needed to be coordinated at that level? And I don't know if you do coordinate at the moment on the roading network.
Yeah, very much so. And our first real opportunity to do that was in July last year with the series of events that we had. And we ended up with twice daily regular briefings. We're bringing in the activated emergency operations centres plus the likes of Waka Kotahi and others for that shared common picture.
That's great to know.
Any further questions or discussion? Looks as though that might have been quick work. So I guess we have two recommendations that are on page 38, note the report and note the updates that are in that.
So can I just ask one other
Yes,
question?
okay.
Sorry. In light of, and I think this, I should have asked this question in finance, but I should leave briefly. I think it was in finance. It was somewhere about understaffing in this area. Am I right? Or have I got that wrong? And I don't think it's in this report, was it? Was it a finance report?
Yes, so we do still have some vacancies that we are working to try and fill.
Okay, and so the question then, and again, because of our learnings from, or our need to be prepared, how would that compromise a response if something happened now?
Negligible. Those vacancies are really about the effectively the restructure we're having around the leadership of the district-based emergency management advisors. So getting a better leadership structure in place there. And then the second one is more around the planning and projects. So we'll have an impact once we start looking at our next group plan and that long-term planning.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
It's hard
Thank you.
these things cross papers.
Right. So any further questions? Someone care to move those two recommendations? Councillor Wilson, second. Councillor Robertson. All those in discussion? No. All those in favour? Aye. All those against? Sounds done.
I've got a question to the seat acting.
I think we can
Just
fit
about
that in.
the- what I'm calling it.
You're still in the meeting?
Yeah, probably, yeah, because we've noted two, right, and noted that report, which notes updates in relation to Alpine fault, trifecta, catastrophic event planning. Where do we actually take that now? Because it's giving us some information around when, predictions on Alpine faults and the like. So where is it the long-term plan that we start to figures around those, or have strategic conversations around those? Because the Alpine fault would be sort of,
So no, but I don't know enough.
Difference.
I don't know enough about that particular project. I'd have to go away. I don't know whether Glenn, the next phase of that project well enough to respond now, or we come back with more information about that particular. Because there's a lot of work being done over a number of years. But
There is, and
I
that's what I'm
don't
saying.
know.
Where do we have that
Yeah.
strategic reflection on it to say, well, this is what we're learning. It's a bit like the stuff John Luke
Yeah.
does in natural hazards. So we're hearing all this. When do we start putting that into our thinking?
I'd have to come back to you.
Yeah, that's good. Scott. Thank you. No problem. Yep. Thanks, good.
Thank you. Look, we'll close the meeting
Thanks.
there at that point then. I'll just close off with a karakia and we can repeat to the rest of our lives. Kua mutu a mātou mahi, me tēnei wā, mā ngā kitia, mai mātou katoa, mātou ho, o mātou whanau, ai o ki te aorangi. Work's finished for the moment. Bless us all, our colleagues, our families. Peace with you. Thanks, everyone. Oh,